No, there's this amazing study that showed that, let's say the age of retirement is 65. If you're 63 or 64 and you are unemployed, your quality of life is very bad. People who are unemployed generally feel very bad about themselves. They sleep poorly, they tend to get depressed. It's very, very bad for your psychology and your well-being to be unemployed. Somebody who's unemployed at 64, when they turn 65, they're not unemployed anymore, they're retired now. The moment that you switch from unemployed to retired, suddenly people are way happier. Now, why is that? There's always been this thinking, this idea that as people got richer, they were going to work less, and there was going to be more time for leisure, more time for play. What we have learned over time is that that's not actually what human beings want to do. The richer that they get, the more that they want to work. People actually really want to be valuable. It's a deep human need. By 2010, we already had Facebook, we had LinkedIn, we had Snapchat, we had almost all of these companies already existed by 2010. So the story from 2010 to 2027 was just eating everything, growing to dominate the world. And I suspect that that's the stage that we're in with crypto. But the scale is only going to get bigger and bigger.
The internet era where you hold the good company, the right company, you're going to make it. In crypto, we have equity and token. Where does the value go?
All of the stock market for crypto is worth less than half of Ethereum.
Okay, if you were starting your career today, would you pick?
This is a stupid mentality. Your problem is that you are so flighty and you just constantly change your mind. That's ridiculous.
I'm really happy to be joined by Haseeb Qureshi. He is the managing partner of Dragonfly. You went from professional poker player to Silicon Valley software engineer and to one of the most influential people in crypto.
Well, thank you. That's very high praise. I don't know if I can live up to that, but thank you.
You've seen three very different stages and competitive environment, poker, Silicon Valley, and crypto. Which one taught you the most about how the world really works?
How the world works. It's a good question. I'd say crypto investing definitely taught me the most how the world works. Crypto is unique because it's an industry that has touched almost everything at some point. Sometimes it's touched them in a way that got rejected. So, you think about, things like gaming. I had to learn a lot about the gaming industry in 2021, 2022, when crypto was like, oh, we're going to disrupt all the gaming industry and all the future of games are going to be on blockchains. I didn't know, I played video games. I didn't know about the video game industry. So I had to learn a lot about that. Or people talking about, oh, crypto is going to replace supply chains. It's going to totally disrupt the way that IoT works or this industry or that industry. And so being a crypto investor, you kind of have to learn about almost everything. You have to learn how the law works because, of course, crypto is constantly under the crosshairs of the law. You have to learn how bankruptcy works. You have to learn how FDIC works. I've learned so many things over my journey as a crypto investor that I think in most other domains, you just don't have to learn. Most things are pretty contained and myopic, but crypto touches geopolitics, it touches, law, it touches philosophy, it touches economics. It's such an incredibly fertile field that I've found it to be an incredible education.
How would you describe yourself? How do you go from, poker player to software engineer? That's such a big difference. And then crypto, it's like very different, right? How do you describe yourself? Are you a fast learner? I'm just trying to understand how that works.
Yeah, I mean, look, I am somebody who picks things up, not just quickly, but with a lot of energy. And I think that's the biggest difference. I know a lot of people who are smart. I know a lot of people who can learn things quickly. But the way that my friends describe me, and the thing that I think it was easy to tell a long time ago what may be different, is that when I'm convinced that this thing is the right thing for me to do, I throw myself into it with everything I've got. And I'm very, very quickly able to cut the old thing and start the new thing. And most people really struggle with that. They're like, oh, I've spent so much of my life learning this thing. And, I'm so respected. And, all my friends know this about me. My mom loves this about me. And I'm going to throw all that away and go do this other thing because I think it's more important. And, when I was younger and I was doing this where I studied English and philosophy in school. I have a bachelor's degree in the humanities. And, most people were like, well, you should go to law school. And I was like, okay, I guess I should go to law school. And so I studied for the LSAT and I applied to a bunch of law schools. And I realized, I think fairly late, that I was like, oh, I'm probably not going to finish this if I do this. I'm exactly the kind of person. I was reading about people who dropped out of law school and who got saddled with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. And I just realized reading this that I'm definitely one of those people. I'm totally one of those people that I'm going to spend 2 years learning as hard as I can and then be like, wait, this is a total waste of my time. What am I doing? I should go build a business. And so I was like, oh, I should just skip that. I should just skip that and go to Silicon Valley where I want to build a business. And so I came to Silicon Valley and I decided, okay, well, what do you need to do to learn a business when you have no business skills? And the answer is, well, you should learn how to code, because coding is the only thing that you don't need a credential for. If you're good at coding, you can just get a job. And so I was like, okay, I need to go learn how to code. How do you do that? The answer is, okay, go take one of these coding boot camps, learn very quickly how to code. And if you outwork everybody else, then maybe you'll be able to get a job in the tech industry, despite the fact that you have this weird background with no formal skills. And so I was like, okay, I will do that. And I will work nights and weekends. I'll stay there later than anybody else. And I will just learn how to code. And I did that. And so along this time, at that time I wasn't a big successful guy. I'd been successful as a poker player, but then I left all that behind and started over. And so my friends were like, Haseeb, what is wrong with you? You just you decide oh, I'm going to do law school. You spend all this time studying for the tests and applying to schools, and you just leave it all and you go to Silicon Valley to go do this other thing. You can't stick to anything. Your problem is that you are so flighty and you just constantly change your mind. And I'm like, no. You don't get it. I didn't know a damn thing when I applied to law school. I completely did not understand the world. And the more that I learned about the world, the more I realized, no, I should not be doing that. I should be doing this instead. And so when I got out of my job at a tech company and I was like, hey, what's going on in the world that's most interesting to me? I think crypto. Actually, when I left Airbnb, so I was working at Airbnb as a software engineer, I remember writing down on a piece of paper what I knew that I wanted to build a company. That was just the thing in my mind is that I should build a
what
company. What company? What should I build in? Yeah. And there were two fields that I thought about going into. The first one was crypto, and the second one was AI. Now, this was in 2016. This was 2016.
Wow.
Now, at the time, AI was not like what it is today, right? AI was basically you need a machine learning PhD in order to be a real meaningful contributor at the frontier of AI. And so, what I told myself is look, if I go into AI today, I'm playing from behind. The people who are really contributing in this industry are machine learning PhDs, been doing this for a long, long time. And I'll always be from behind because I have this weird non-conventional background. But if I go into crypto, in crypto, nobody knows anything. There are no crypto PhDs. Everybody just figured this out 10 minutes ago. It's a brand new industry, no rules. Everybody is learning at the same time. And so I'm like, well, I bet I could also learn. I could learn just as much as anyone else can. And that's what ended up convincing me to choose crypto over AI. And at that time, I knew almost nothing about crypto. I knew Bitcoin, I knew Ethereum, I learned about the DAO hack, and that was all I knew. I just knew that it was crazy and that it was super interesting. And so that's what ended up leading me going into crypto. So again, I think from the perspective of people at the time, it looked like, wow, Haseeb, you're so impulsive. You'd left this great tech job to go to this crazy, bubbly, stupid little industry with nothing going on. Why are you doing that? Once again, you're just super flighty. And when I look back on that, I'm like, no. The property that I had that very few people I knew at the time had was that when I'm convicted in something, I go all in. And I say, great, I'm going to chase this as hard as I can. And if I'm wrong, then I'll change my mind and I'll go do something else. And I was just convinced that I was right. So even when I came into crypto in 2017, that was the height of the market and the craziness of the ICO boom. By 2018, it was all collapsing. I had just become an investor at Metastable and, just started learning the ropes of VC. And just as I was doing that, everybody around me who came in the industry at the same time left because they were all like, oh, this was all a mirage. This was all bullshit. None of this is real. And I was convinced that no. You guys are overreacting. You guys don't have enough conviction in this space. this space is going to be absolutely huge. And like the future of money is absolutely going to be changed forever by what was invented in this industry. I was just completely confident that they were all wrong. And so I stuck it out in this industry as an investor, and I've been here for, coming up on 10 years now.
Okay, if you were starting your career today, would you pick crypto or AI?
I would pick AI for sure.
100%
AI. Yeah. No, because crypto is a lot more mature today than it was at the time that I came into it. At the time that I came into crypto really needed someone like me. Not that I was that special, but more that like crypto just needed people. It needed smart people to like come in and start thinking about all the hard problems that they were going to face. It's not that crypto doesn't need people today. It obviously does, but crypto needs people, fintech needs people, biotech needs people, everything needs people because there's a lot of problems to solve in the world. But what needs people more than anything else and is still totally undecided, still in the infancy, is complete Wild West. That's AI today, And so I think a lot of people in crypto, they get really anxious. They say, oh no, people are going to AI. Oh no, what was me?
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is a stupid mentality. It's a big world. There's always multiple things going on. And what, your goal as somebody in crypto should not be that the rest of the world does not advance. You should not want the rest of technology to stay still.
True.
Right? You should want the rest of technology to evolve like crazy because crypto is the most cyberpunk futuristic technology there could possibly be. Crypto is going to succeed in a world where everything else changes. If everything stays the same and, the year 2040 looks like the year 1990, then crypto is going to fail. Crypto is designed for the future, but if the future doesn't come, there's no one to use all this stuff. So that's why I think it's very foolish for people who start thinking that crypto wins when AI fails. It's the opposite.
When you started, crypto was, very new to everybody. So people had equal chances, right? Right now, AI, there are people that are so good and people that are just learning it for the first time.
Yeah. I think this is overrated. I don't think this is true. So if you listen to Dario, the CEO of Anthropic, what he says is that, this was just a few years ago when Anthropic was first growing as a business. He said that we actually don't try to hire machine learning PhDs. We just try to hire smart people because machine learning PhDs, most of them were learning machine learning in a time before LLMs. And all of that stuff is mostly useless today because it's just not the way that machines learn anymore. Machines don't learn the way they did 10 years ago. So some guy who got a machine learning PhD 10 years ago, they don't know a damn thing about LLMs. They don't know about transformers. Transformers were invented 10 years ago. So is it really possible that somebody who got a machine learning PhD 10 years ago happened to study transformers? We didn't know that transformers were going to control everything in the future 10 years ago. So now if you get a Stanford PhD today, then okay, you're learning about LLMs for sure. But so much is yet to be written. And so much of like everybody, go talk to all these people who are working in the field. They're drinking from a fire hose every day. I remember what that was like. If you were in crypto back in the day that I was there, or like in DeFi summer, or like when all this stuff was changing in real time, it's the same feeling. Everything is changing all the time. And somebody who joins has just as much ability to keep up with the latest and greatest as somebody who's been doing it for 10 years. Now, that's not to say there's no gap. Of course, there's stuff you had to learn. But is it really true that it's like, oh, you're late? No, that's ridiculous. There's a story from Mark Andreessen when he arrived in Silicon Valley in, I think it was like 1997, right? Young kid from Ohio. And what he says is that, by the time that I had showed up in Silicon Valley, there was already, Cisco and Silicon Graphics and, all these great companies were already huge. I was reading about it on the cover of magazines. And I, this little kid, come all the way here to Silicon Valley, and I was worried that the whole thing was already over, that I was too late, right? He thought he was too late in 1997 about the internet. The internet had barely even started at the time that he showed up. So no, if you're showing up today, you are in the first chapter, in the first book of what's going to happen in the future of this technology.
要进阶到更高阶的财富金字塔，学习投资是一定要的。Mitrade 这个投资平台呢，拥有全球的4大监管机构交易牌照，而且呢，商品的种类很多，最近热门的黄金啊、白银啊、美股外汇、加密货币指数 ETF 都可以交易。它支援信用卡跟 USDT 直接出入金，不用先换成美金再转账。交易本身呢，免佣金，点差偏低，杠杆最高可以开到200倍。不过当然啦，我们知道杠杆务必要小心使用。账户预设有最高100万美元的保险保障，由保险公司来承保。在 Mitrade 上面呢，可以做多做空，涨跌都有机会获利。交易的门槛很低，只要5美元就可以开始交易。它跟 TradingView 合作，内置了 TradingView 指标免费使用。平台里面有非常多的资讯、新闻还有交易策略都可以来参考。他们也是阿根廷国家足球队的官方赞助商。2025年获得了像是欧洲的最可靠经纪商、最佳数字客户体验这一类金融类别奖项的肯定。现在呢，有一个频道专属的活动哦，从这一支影片的资讯栏连结加入，完成入金的任务之后呢，就最高可以领到1300块美金的交易赠金。赚到的可以提领，赔了就平台吸收。想要尝试操作呢，也可以先无痛的练习，连结就在资讯栏。I remember before ChatGPT, people are saying the same thing about crypto, that this is the early internet and everybody is so early, but now, it's only been a couple of years. People are talking about the next thing now.
That's the thing. It's not the next thing. It's another thing. And there will always be another thing. But the reality, look, so, in the very early internet, right, we had very different form factors that we had once the internet matured. So if you think about Web 2, right, what do we call Web 2? Web 2 is the whole idea that you can read and write to the internet. You've got comment sections, you've got social media, you've got all this stuff. Didn't exist in Web 1, right? Web 1 was like static page. You have a home page, and you go to the home page and you read the home page. People, I remember at the time, there was a lot of excitement because Time Magazine was on the internet. They had a web page. People were like, oh, Time Magazine is going to rule the internet. Because they came to the internet first, they're going to crush it. I think it's the same thing as like people worrying about, Stripe now has a product, so they're going to control stablecoins. It's ridiculous, right? Like this has always been the concern of people when they see big companies coming into these spaces. But the reality is that, okay, when you first started to see Facebook, and you first started to see, these Web 2 era companies start to form their products, did that mean that like, okay, Facebook now has a news feed? Is it basically on to the next thing? Is the internet over? No. It was another 20 years of the internet eating everything, just growing and growing and growing and growing until it subsumed the whole world, right? Now, the number of products that emerged after like 2010 became way fewer, right? By 2010, we already had Facebook, we had LinkedIn, we had Snapchat, we had almost all of these companies already existed by 2010. But they had not grown to the extent that they did. Like the only major social media company that emerged after 2010 was ByteDance and TikTok. That had not emerged yet. But YouTube, all this stuff already existed at that time. So the story from 2010 to 2027 was just eating everything. That was the story from then on forward. So it was not new products. It was not new companies. It was the companies that were there growing to dominate the world. And I suspect that that's the stage that we're in with crypto. We kind of know the shape that crypto is going to take now. We can sort of see, okay, there's going to be DeFi, there's going to be stablecoins, there's going to be some applications, there's going to be Bitcoin, there's going to be some on-chain, programmable rails and smart contracts you can use to facilitate different kinds of, financial agreements. It's probably not going to be a billion games. It's probably not going to be, all this other stuff that we talked about. We kind of see the shape of it, right? But the scale is only going to get bigger and bigger. So if you were an early Facebook user and you're kind of like, well, what really even changed? I already had a Facebook feed, in 2010, the internet got boring. There's nothing more going on. And the answer is like, okay, yeah, kind of. That's sort of true, but it's also not true because, as the saying goes, quantity is a quality of its own. When the scale gets big enough, it really becomes qualitatively different. When stablecoins are the dominant way that money is moving through the world internationally, it actually really changes the way that stablecoins are. It changes the way that blockchains are. It changes the way that you interact with all this stuff, the way they get regulated, the way they get treated. So I think that's where this technology is going, is that we see the shape of it and we know how it's going to fit, but it just grows bigger and bigger and bigger. Whereas with AI, we don't know. We don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know even, it's not a question of how big it's going to get. It's what is your life with an AI agent going to look like in 10 years? Who knows?
there is this narrative that crypto is built for AI and robots, not humans. And does that, echo to what you just said? It's going to be bigger and a few players dominating the whole field. Less altcoins.
Yeah.
No crazy projects.
Probably it will happen over the next 5 to 10 years that a lot of altcoins you'll see this sort of, this larger and larger divide between the really successful scaled projects and the ones that never got to scale. Now, this is normal, right? I mean, think of social media platforms. Social media, again, was the biggest, most important trend of the last 20 years. If you look at some of the biggest companies in the world, almost all of them are some kind of social media companies. But again, there were almost no new social media companies after 2010. So early on, there were a bunch of them, right? There was, Foursquare, and there was, Yelp and MySpace and this and that and blah, blah, blah. And over time, there was consolidation. I think you should expect to see the same thing within crypto, is that there probably is not going to be, 400 layer ones. There's also not going to be just one layer one. There's going to be some number of them, the same way that there's Facebook, there's LinkedIn, there's WeChat, there's Instagram. So there are genuinely different modalities. They serve genuinely different types of use cases, but there's not room for infinite of them. And that is going to change over time as the market matures. But I would say in 10 years, so to answer your question, is crypto going to be used for AIs, or is it going to be primarily used by humans? I think one of the things that's obvious the more time you spend on it is that humans don't naturally click with crypto. Crypto is really weird for humans. Yeah. So, okay. I mean, think about every time that you've tried to get a family member to use crypto, and you've got to explain to them. Yeah, you got to explain to them like a wallet, right? And a wallet is like a big long string of hexadecimal characters. It's not human readable, right? And you have to tell them like, no. When you send this thing, there's 18 decimal points that you can add to this thing, which is like, human beings, why do we have 18 decimal point? Why isn't it just cents? Why can't it be like dollars and cents? Like, that seems way simpler. Why is it that you send a transaction and all my money can get hacked? Right? That seems really weird. That seems like that shouldn't happen. Why is it when I sign this transaction, I get this weird long string that I can't read as a human being? And like, shouldn't it be in English? Like, why is it like this? There's all these things that are part of crypto that we, at this point, we're crypto natives. We think of this as normal, right? We think of it as like, you got to check your approvals, and you got to make sure that you don't get hacked, and like, you got to never click on drainers, and always check the domain. And like, we know all of these things because we've been in the space for a very long time. But the original story that I was told when I first got into crypto back in 2016, right? That story was that smart contracts would change the way that people did legal agreements. Is that instead of signing a legal contract, you would sign a smart contract. That's why we call them contracts, right? Is the analogy between legal contracts and code. And the idea is that, okay, you and I want to strike a deal. We're going to sign a smart contract, and that smart contract is going to check the outcome. And look, I've been doing this now for 10 years, and I have never done an investment via a smart contract. Every time I do an investment, I sign a legal contract. Okay. Now, I'm one of the most sophisticated firms in the industry. We manage billions of dollars. We've literally got engineers on staff. Why are we not? And our counterparties are other crypto startups, and yet we're not signing deals with smart contracts. Why are we not doing that? The answer is because we trust the legal contract more than we trust the smart contract. Because the legal contract, we know if something goes wrong, who is going to decide the outcome? The answer is a judge. A judge will decide the outcome. And the judge will probably not include a bug in the contract, right? If the contract is written in a weird way, the judge is going to make sure that it does something pretty reasonable, right? But if a smart contract is written in a weird way and there's a bug in the smart contract, the EVM is not going to do something reasonable. The EVM is going to do exactly what the bytecode says. And that's not what I want. That's not what my counterparty wants. We both want a reasonable thing to happen. And so the reality is that like, we are better at understanding what will happen in a legal contract than in a smart contract. But AIs are different. Okay, AIs are different. Why are AIs different? AIs are different because they actually can easily understand a smart contract. They can much more easily understand code than they can understand a legal contract. Okay, now why do I say that? A legal contract is by its nature random. What's the randomness in a legal contract? The randomness is, okay, so first of all, I've written this contract with you. First, is this contract going to be enforceable? Sometimes it's not. Like, for example, let's say I put you under duress. That means that you can negate the contract. You can't tell from the contract whether you're under duress. I can't tell. But if you can prove it to a judge, you can negate the contract. Okay. Second, what jurisdiction are we going to be in, right? You're in Asia. I'm in the US. Where is this contract going to be adjudicated? Maybe we say we were going to do it here, but maybe we fight about it and we do it over there. And now the rules are totally different, right? Third thing is, okay, let's say we actually go to court. We go to court. Who's the judge? The judge is random. It's literally done by a lottery. When you go to court, they pull a ball out of a hat to decide who your judge is. And some judges like you, some judges like this, some judges like that. And then if you go to a full jury trial, then they literally choose 12 random people off the street who are going to be the people who decide your case, right? Okay, so if you're an AI agent, there are so many random pieces of information to help you understand what's going to happen if I sign this agreement with this person. I literally cannot guess. There's randomness embedded in that process. But if I sign a smart contract with this person, I can read every single piece of bytecode. I can simulate the whole thing. I can formally verify the code. And I can do that all within the span of seconds. The smart contract is entirely deterministic, but the legal contract is not. And so an AI agent, in a way, like the people who built Ethereum, they thought, well, everybody will just read the code. And obviously we'll all read the code and we'll understand exactly what it does and we'll trust it. We'll trust it more than we trust the legal system. The problem with the story is that the people who wrote Ethereum are all autistic programmers. And autistic programmers, they really feel like, oh, I trust the code. I read the code and it's great. The problem is that we're not like that. Most human beings are not like autistic programmers, but AI agents are more like autistic programmers than they're like the rest of us. And so in a way, AI agents are kind of the perfect customer. All of the things that you have to do, right? Like the fact that you have to keep your private key completely secret and never show it to anybody else. Otherwise, you'll lose all your money. Very unintuitive for human beings, completely intuitive for an AI agent. An AI agent already knows what an API key is. It knows how to keep secrets. And so an AI agent can handle that. It already knows how to sign a smart contract. It already knows how to read code. It already knows all of the things that you would need to do in order to interact with a blockchain-based system. And so that's why I claim, you imagine I have an agent, you have an agent, we're both asleep. Our agents make a deal with each other, and they just do a few rounds of negotiating the code of a smart contract. They agree, they sign the smart contract, they engage in some kind of deal, we wake up, and the deal's already done. That is the future in which smart contracts are going to be the predominant way that agents are able to collaborate with each other and actually build trust in each other, even if the principals, even if you and I don't know each other and don't have to know each other.
So if our AI agents sign a deal and I do not honor the deal, who goes to jail?
Well, if the deal involves you, like you, the human being, then the AI agent, my AI agent, basically can't underwrite it itself, right? Because just knowing the smart contract isn't enough to say, okay, is Bonnie actually going to follow through on the deal? The smart contract can't verify that. So if the good provided is digital, and most of the time when AI agents are collaborating, they're exchanging some kind of digital goods. They're not, you're not physically sending me something in the mail, or you're not going to agree to post me on your podcast or whatever. Most of the time, if two AI agents are interacting with each other, the thing that they're interacting over is digital in nature. So maybe it's like, hey, you're going to work with me and you're going to help me write this article, or you're going to help me do this, or whatever. Or you're going to expend these tokens for me, or you're going to let me use an API that you have access to that I don't, right? So maybe I'm in the US, I can access the newest Anthropic model, but because you're in Asia, you can't access it. And so you say, hey, I'll pay you if you can give me some tokens from your thing. And I say, okay, I'll do that. Smart contract verifies it, the end.
Talking about this, there is this concept called ghost GDP. So all the AI agents, buy and sell from each other billions of times a second, but the economy, or like it seems like it's booming, right? But no money actually goes to a human pocket. Now what?
I think this is it's an important concept of ghost GDP. What ghost GDP is trying to get at is this idea that economic value has been created but not measured. So let's just think today. We already have a lot of ghost GDP that's created by AI. So let me just give you an example. So most people I know use ChatGPT for some kind of healthcare. Okay. Now, normally, if you were being provided that healthcare advice, you would have to go to a doctor. You would have to go pay your hospital visit or pay your local practitioner visit, and go book with their assistant and have set up a time and go in there and say, hey, dog, what's wrong? Oh, I have this rash. I have this thing. Oh, I'm not sleeping well. Or, oh, whatever. I'm looking at this medication. It's causing me this issue. And they would say, oh, no, it's fine, blah, blah, blah. And they'd send you home, right? Mm-hmm. That's what used to happen, okay? Today, you ask ChatGPT, you get the answer in 2 seconds, done, okay? Now, that is a service that's been provided to you that would normally cost you a lot of money. But right now, you are getting it basically at the marginal cost of just your ChatGPT subscription. You're getting it for free, right?
Yeah.
That is Ghost GDP. That is economic value that was created that in an alternate world, there would be an exchange of goods, right? There would be an exchange of a service that they pay taxes, you pay taxes on that whole transaction. You pay sales tax, they pay payroll tax, right? But now, there's no record that ever happened. The government doesn't know that there were services provided. It doesn't know that you received these valuable services of getting this medical advice, and that you were willing to pay for that by buying your ChatGPT subscription, right? Or sometimes, for a lot of people, it's like even free. So these services are actually wealth. You are wealthier when you get services for free. The same way that if I gave you bananas for free, you'd be like, well, now I'm wealthier. I got more bananas, right? When I give you healthcare is also a valuable thing that you just got, but there's no measurement of it. It doesn't show up in GDP, doesn't show up in income, doesn't show up in payroll, doesn't show up anywhere. So this is one of the problems with using GDP as the principal measure of the wealth of a society, is that these kinds of services that are too cheap to meter, where you're getting something that would otherwise have cost you a lot of money and you're now getting it for free, this does not get measured by the way that we measure GDP. Now you could look at that and say, oh my God, that's terrible. That means that there's going to be an economic collapse. That's wrong. It's the wrong way to understand what's happening. The right way to understand what's happening is that everybody in society just got richer. That's the right way to understand what's happening, right? If you had a machine that could magically manifest bananas in your house, right? Just literally transmogrify them and pull them out of outer space, okay? That would not show up in GDP. Nobody bought anything. Nobody sold anything. It would not look like society got richer. You'd say GDP was flat this year. No one got any richer, and society is exactly the same as it was last year. Well, no, it's not. We all got magical banana machine. We have infinite bananas. We are insanely rich now because everybody can have as many bananas as they want. That's kind of what just happened with ChatGPT. And so this Ghost GDP concept, the way that Citrini, the article that went viral about this, it kind of paints this as a disastrous concept, is that Ghost GDP is really bad. It means that somehow this is going to lead to some kind of social collapse. I think the right way to understand Ghost GDP is that that's what it looks like when you get richer from a technology that creates a ton of value.
Is rich the right word? Is my quality of life improved, but did I get richer? You
got richer. So when you receive more goods and services, you get richer. So what is the point of having money? Let's maybe ask a deeper question, right? When you say richer, usually what you mean is I have more money. What's the point of having more money? Money is a currency that you can use to trade for goods and services. Okay, so if you're now spending less on other goods and services, you're spending less on healthcare, that means you have more money to spend on other things. If you would otherwise have spent that money on going to the doctor and having that doctor prescribe you a blah, 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 right? Now we have more doctors who are less busy and they can go and treat other things. That lowers the cost of healthcare. And it means that you're getting healthcare for free, which means that you can spend the money you would have spent on healthcare on other things. So when a handyman, right? Normally you'd have a handyman come in and help you fix some, it's your AC is miswired, okay? Now you take ChatGPT, you point it at the wiring, and you say, tell me what to do. And ChatGPT says, oh, move this thing over here, move the green wire here and the blue wire here, done. You do that, it works, right? Okay, this is Ghost GDP. You say, okay, well, does that make me richer? How is that richer? I just helped unwire my thing. Well, the answer is that you would have to go pay a handyman. Handyman would have to come to your house. That person now is freed up to go do something else. And you have $75 in your pocket that you wouldn't otherwise have.
Is it possible that because people are worried about the handyman has nothing else to do?
Well, so one, I wouldn't worry about handyman. There's a lot of work for handyman to do.
Yes.
It is probably true that there's going to be downward pressure on wages for some of the things that are directly competitive with AI. But the reality is that, for handymen, most of what they do is not fix trivial little problems. Like the trivial little problems are the things that you're now saving from your handyman, but you are not going to go do like a deep HVAC repair with ChatGPT, right? Like that's just not going to happen.
Yet.
Not even yet. Like you don't have the tools, you don't have like the measurement, like, if you've seen like really serious HVAC stuff, you need a lot of stuff in order to like actually debug an HVAC. Like you might need to get it replaced. You might need to like, check, oh, hey, the coolant is not enough or the insulation is bad. So that kind of expertise, like ChatGPT can tell you, oh, go tear out the insulation and go inside. Are you going to do that? Or are you going to say, all right, screw this. This is beyond my pay grade. I'm going to just go hire an HVAC guy. So I think that's largely the answer, is that, and obviously there's a lot of manual labor that's involved in a lot of handyman type tasks. So now look, I worry a lot more about programmers. I worry a lot more about doctors. I think if anything, actually doctors are probably the most exposed to AI. Because if you think about doctors, like, what is a doctor? A doctor is somebody who's gotten a lot of education, but actually doesn't have that much in the way of physical skills, right? The reason why a doctor is the most highly paid person in the medical system is because they're the most knowledgeable. But a doctor is not a surgeon. A doctor is not a physician's assistant. A doctor is not a nurse. Their job is not to physically do the thing. Their job is to use their head and to figure out what is the diagnosis, what do I prescribe, what do I know, and have the bedside manner, right? But today, ChatGPT is as good as most doctors and better than most doctors. Mm-hmm. And it knows more. It never gets tired, never gets lazy, never gets short, never gets angry. It's always going to be polite to you. And if somebody needs to actually draw blood, the doctor generally doesn't do that. The nurse does that, right? The physician's assistant does that. The doctor's job was to have knowledge in their head. And those jobs are the ones that are going to be most at risk. Because in the same way, we used to have calculators. Calculators meant human beings who calculated. That's what a calculator meant. It was a human with an abacus who would add numbers together to help you when you are trying to do business tasks. Today, a calculator is a little machine. All those people who did calculations are gone. In the same way, the idea that it's a job to memorize facts and hold them in your head, we are going to look back at that in 15 years and say, wow, that's so antiquated. It's going to look to us the same way that calculators look to us, of human calculators with abacuses manually doing a bunch of math.
Is that also going to bankrupt all the middleman services, the apps, Uber Eats, Expedia, DoorDash?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Why do you say that?
So this is, again, one of the things in the Citrini article that I thought was completely just a total misunderstanding of these business models. There are a lot of competitors to DoorDash already. Right? His article was that, oh, well, somebody could just vibe code the next DoorDash and then all the Dashers will, check all the apps and blah, 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 blah. The primary hard thing about DoorDash is not writing a CRUD app. The hard part about DoorDash is the logistics network. That's what's hard about DoorDash, right? The hard part about DoorDash is the dispute resolution. That's what's hard about DoorDash, is that somebody shows up at your house, the food is cold or they got the wrong food. Who's right? How do you decide this person should get a refund or this person should not? How do you make sure the error rate is sufficiently low? How do you make sure people trust that every time I order DoorDash, the right thing happens or I get my money back? That is a really hard problem that has very little to do with software. It has much more to do with just like how do you cultivate and run an effective business with contractors who you keep track of and make sure that they're performing at a very high level, that they're well trained, that they're getting the right feedback, that they're in the right place at the right time. How do you make sure all the merchants are on there so that people can all find all the food at the right time? All this stuff is much more about logistics and about reputation than it is just purely about software. And so that's why there are a lot of competitors to DoorDash, and like new ones spin up every day, but they can't take a bite out of DoorDash's meal.
What about Airbnb?
Well, so I used to work at Airbnb, so I know Airbnb very well. There were a lot of Airbnb competitors. So there's VRBO, there's what's that one that's like HomeAway or something. The hard part about Airbnb, same thing. The hard part about Airbnb is not how can I make an app that lists houses and lets you look at them. Actually, if you tell an AI to make an Airbnb clone, it can do it in about 10 minutes. It's extremely trivial to create something that looks like Airbnb. The hard part about Airbnb is, again, the logistics, which is that you are going to a house. You are going to stay in that house. That house had better be safe, had better be what it purports to be, had better actually deliver the place that I'm staying and not double book it with somebody else, such that when I show up, someone's already in there, right? If that happens even once, much less twice, I'm out forever. I'm never coming back. I'm not even going to try this again because that's the scariest shit I've ever heard. This kind of stuff where it's freestanding software, that all of the state for that software is yours, is your state, it's hosted locally, those are the businesses that are most threatened by AI, right? If Airbnb's code got leaked, who cares? Who's on Airbnb because of the wonderful code they wrote? Who's not building an Airbnb competitor because they don't know how to write the code? So when you think about it this way, it suddenly becomes very obvious the difference between the businesses who would really be impaired by somebody going and writing a clone and the businesses that, if their code base leaked, whatever, who cares? Boo-hoo.
Do you think in the future we're going to, be able to retire early and have a better quality of life? I think people are trying to imagine, because AI is so revolutionary. Now what? Like, what is our life going to look like in 20 years? Are we going to sit on a beach all day?
It's really hard to say. Yeah.
I don't know. 10 years. Let's start with 10 years.
10 years. Definitely not 10 years. 10 years is not enough for it to fully diffuse through the economy. Look, 20 years, here's what I'll say. If you look at the history of working hours over the last, call it, 150 years since the Industrial Revolution, do you think that human beings have been starting to work more or work less over time?
More.
People are working more. People are working more than they ever have.
Damn.
Now, the interesting thing is that they're working more even in rich countries. And even in the richest percentages of those countries, people are working more. So it's not true that you would think that okay, well, why aren't we Victorian aristocrats? That once we get super rich, we just laze all day and we hang out in the court and we watch people, these little proteges play music. Why don't we just hang out all day and eat crumpets and talk about gossip? And the answer is
Are we doing easier jobs?
We're certainly doing easier jobs than backbreaking labor or the kind of conditions under which people worked. People used to, people just 50 years ago, they worked without AC, they worked without, there was no TV, there were no phones, there was no email, there was no anything. So obviously in that sense, jobs are way easier than they were before. Look, I'm taking this call from home. I didn't even have to leave, right? I've literally been in my house all day. I don't have to commute. I don't have to go on a train. I don't have to deal with, all the bullshit of hanging out and waiting. People didn't even have phones when they were on their commutes before, So yes, our jobs are way easier than jobs were in the past. No doubt about that. That being said, and obviously I do knowledge work, so I'm somebody who, my job is particularly easy, but even among, people who are doing physical labor, the kind of physical labor people were doing 100 years ago is unrecognizably brutal compared to the physical labor that people do today. Now why do I say all that? There's always been this thinking for a long time, even from the time of Adam Smith and John Maynard Keynes, this idea that as people got richer, they were going to work less, and there was going to be more time for leisure, more time for play. And what we have learned over time is that that's not actually what human beings want to do. The richer that they get, the more that they want to work. And that's very counterintuitive. And I think the answer of why this is the case is that people actually really want to be valuable. It's a deep human need to be valuable. And there's this amazing study that showed that if you take elderly people, let's say who are 63, 64, right? Let's say the age of retirement is 65 in this country, okay? If you're 63 or 64 and you're unemployed, your quality of life is very bad. People who are unemployed generally feel very bad about themselves. They tend to sleep poorly. They tend to get depressed. It's very, very bad for your psychology and your well-being to be unemployed, right? Not because unemployment physically makes you that well off. Even if you have a strong social safety net, that unemployed people are taken care of, they can eat, they can whatever, live relatively normal lives. Still, people feel terrible when they're unemployed. Now, the interesting thing that happens is that even with a strong social safety net, somebody who's unemployed at 64, when they turn 65, they're not unemployed anymore. They're retired now. And the moment that you switch from unemployed to retired, even if your social benefits did not change, suddenly people are way happier. Now, why is that? Why is it that people feel totally okay with themselves when they're retired, but they feel terrible about themselves when they're unemployed? And the answer is because society tells you when you're 63, 64 that you are not useful. you are not contributing to society. You're not contributing to the tribe. And human beings, we're deeply social animals. We need to feel like we are being useful to our tribes. But when you turn 65, it's like, oh, no. You've been released from that responsibility. It's not that you're useless to the tribe. You are an elder statesman of the tribe. You are now on the senior council. You are one of the elderly retired people. You get to boss people around. You get to tell them what to do, tell them about all your wisdom. Welcome to the club, right? And just that change in mentality makes people suddenly feel much better. And I think this is a large part of the reason why we should not expect that just because we're going to have much more material wealth, just because we're going to have a lot less of these kind of knowledge work type jobs to go around, that people are going to spend all their time playing video games. I mean, some people obviously will, but the more likely thing is that we are going to find alternative ways of valuing each other and showing each other that we're valuable. We're going to still feel the need to be needed. And that is going to express itself in other ways. So I suspect there will be a lot more jobs that we will look now and say, that's really weird that, today, if I told you that there are going to be a lot more professional chess players in the future compared to today, that's like, what? Why are there professional chess players in the future? But I predict there probably will be. I think the reason why is that people will have higher demand for other high-performance humans. They will find it entertaining. And watching AIs play chess, I mean, AIs could already beat the best humans at chess 20 years ago. So why are there any humans playing chess? The answer is because we like to watch them. That's why there are humans playing chess, not because we're the best in the world at it. We're not. We were superseded a long time ago. Why do we like to watch people play sports? Because, is it because the human form is the best at moving a ball into a hoop? No, it's not. Actually, we built robots that can do it way better than humans a long time ago. But we like to see what happens when the humans compete because it's very satisfying to us. And so my guess is that you will see a lot more of these kinds of jobs, which are kind of weird. Sort of feels like this is kind of made up. Why did we just create like more demand for sports and for, all these like stupid things that don't really advance human civilization? It's just pure entertainment. I think there's going to be a lot more demand for these kinds of things because everything else is basically being done by machines.
You mentioned
there's going to be a lot of unintuitive things. A lot of entertainment, right? I mean, that's actually what happens as societies get richer. That's what happens when societies get richer. Poor societies don't have entertainers. They don't exist, right? Entertainment in very poor, think about back to Victorian England, entertainment was a very rare job because most people could not afford to be entertained. They couldn't afford to pay other humans to entertain them. Today, entertainment is very cheap because of mass media and, you can just watch TikTok and the marginal cost of providing you TikTok, it's so cheap, they literally give it to you for free. That's how cheap entertainment has become. But, I think that the provision of services, the ways in which we as human beings do things for each other that nobody else can do, and the reality is a lot of physical tasks. Like robotics is going to be a lot harder to crack than intelligence. We can already see that. Intelligence has blown us away in the progress. And if you look at robotics, you know that video of the robot trying to put dishes in the dishwasher, like we're very, very far away today from robots actually being able to help you relative to a human. So I think there's going to be a long span of time where you see the intelligent tasks pulled in this direction and physical tasks pulled in the opposite direction. Actually, people who can do physical tasks are probably going to be paid more in the future, a lot more in the future. That would be my guess.
We talk a lot about AI, but you just closed a fund of $650 million on crypto.
Yeah.
So you still believe
right.
in crypto?
Of course I believe in crypto. Look.
Why not AI fund?
Well, there's a lot of AI funds. So there's people already doing that. They don't need me to do that. The reason why we are raising a crypto fund, we raised a crypto fund, is because we believe in crypto. We believe crypto is going to be enormous. It's going to be one of the biggest technology trends of our lifetimes. I wrote this post a while back called In Defense of Exponentials, where I compare the rise of smart contract platforms to the rise of e-commerce in the 90s. And, e-commerce, my partner, Bo, who is one of the founders of Dragonfly, he often describes what it was like in the early days of e-commerce when, they'd sit around a table arguing about who is e-commerce going to be used for? Is it going to be, only women who use e-commerce because they like to do all the shopping? Maybe e-commerce is only going to be for women. Maybe e-commerce is only going to be used for books and durable goods, but it's never going to be for food. It's never going to be for perishables. They had all these different ideas about who's going to use e-commerce. And the right answer was e-commerce is going to be used for everything. The right answer was everything. There is no market for e-commerce. The market for e-commerce is everything. So in the same way, I think this is going to be true for crypto. And I think crypto is my e-commerce. Crypto is going to be the thing that over time, it's going to eat everything. It's going to be used for everything. And now when I look back on it, when you look back on e-commerce was this huge, enormous megatrend. But e-commerce was not as big as the internet. The internet obviously was bigger than e-commerce. In the same way, I think I'm going to look back over the span of my career and say, crypto was this huge, gigantic megatrend that ended up changing so much. But crypto was just one part of this larger wave of the ways in which human civilization changed with the advent of AI, with the technology, with the softwareization of everything. The world never just evolves in one dimension. Geopolitics changes, multiple technologies change. You don't have to be the one thing that matters because there is no one thing that matters. Everything matters. So that's why I say I'm very happy to be investing into crypto. But just because I invest in crypto doesn't mean that I should be taking my eye off of everything else that's going to be changing around it.
I love that. Very well said. Have your investment thesis changed over the years? You've raised many rounds, $225 million in 2021, $650 million in 2022, and now this, right? Have you started looking at different things now?
In many ways, our thesis is pretty similar to what it's always been. So,
which is,
what works in crypto? Like the first ever investment we made at Dragonfly was MakerDAO. That was back in 2018. First ever investment we made was a stablecoin. And, if you look today, we're investing a lot into stablecoins. We're continuing to invest in the same trend that we started almost 10 years ago. And, we continue to invest in DeFi. MakerDAO was literally a DeFi protocol. Continue to invest into DeFi and all the innovations that are happening there. I mean, everyone's been paying attention to Hyperliquid and the rise of RWA perps. I think it's a huge mega trend that will continue to grow. Continue to invest in infrastructure. We're investors in 00, which is a network layer protocol. We're obviously investors from our Fund 3 into Monad, into Mega ETH, which are two of the big infrastructure projects from this last vintage. We also invest in Athena, which is obviously we led their seed round. We're big investors there. Also another DeFi protocol, and we need to invest in things that are defining the future. So if you look at Polymarket, we're big investors into Polymarket. Prediction markets are one of the core ideas in crypto. Literally, prediction markets had a whole paragraph in the Ethereum white paper back in 2013 about why this was going to be one of the primary use cases for smart contracts. And Polymarket has brought it to existence. The same thing ultimately is going to be true for the intersection of crypto and AI. It's still very early there, but I think there's going to be a lot of intersection and a lot of surface area for us to cover over the coming years. So I think there's a lot to do. We're actually seeing incredible velocity of pitches. I thought, usually beginning of the year is pretty slow for us as investors, but this has been an incredibly intense start to the year just because there's so much stuff going on in the space.
Is it all concentrated in a few narratives because of institutions?
No, I wouldn't say that's true. I mean, it's certainly true that institutions are driving a lot of the demand for crypto right now because retail has largely checked out. Since 1010, that's when you saw the retail bid for crypto really dry up. And today, if you look at the relative volumes, you look at, perps open interest, you look at, Coinbase downloads on the App Store, you look at all these measures of retail interest, they're down a lot. Retail is checked out right now. And when retail is checked out, all the prices hurt, but especially altcoin prices, because altcoins are mostly owned by retail, right? It's not institutions. Institutions aren't buying alts. They're buying Bitcoin, they're buying some ETH, and that's mostly it. So all that said, my mental model of all this stuff is that they will come back. This space is incredibly cyclical. And in the meantime, I don't fixate too much on what the institutions are doing. Obviously, the institutions matter, but they're actually not the primary driver of anything in crypto. Where is the stablecoin demand coming from? Where is most of stablecoins being used? We talk a lot about institutions, and institutions are very excited about stablecoins. But where are most stablecoins being used? Emerging markets, right? Exactly. Those emerging markets, obviously, those are not institutions in those emerging markets. The overall picture of crypto is that crypto is really a bottoms-up technology. It's not a top-down technology. It's not that, the government and the businesses and the Fortune 500 companies, they're all going to adopt crypto, and that's why crypto is going to be big. No. It's almost never how disruptive technologies work. Disruptive technologies get adopted from the bottoms up, right? If you think about the iPhone was not adopted by businesses, it was adopted by individuals. It's adopted by people. The reality is that you will be surprised how much the world changes when you allow people to see the value in these new technologies and adopt them bottoms up, right? You've probably seen these stories of, these grandmas in China setting up their open claws at these 10 cent things. Like this kind of stuff is exactly how new technologies get adopted. People see the vision, they get excited, and they say, you know what, I'm going to try it. Same thing they did with, why is it that 15% of Americans own crypto? Everyone says, oh, crypto is so hard to use, so scary, so this, so that, and yet 15% of Americans own it. This is because people see the vision of the future and they want to pull it into the present. It's always how it's been done. Bottoms up, not top down.
That's a part of it. A big part is people were promised that they're going to get generational wealth.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
And
it's true.
Is that still true?
Look, there is no story that's going to result in people making, easy overnight money. Mm-hmm. Anything that results in easy overnight money, if it's quickly won, it's quickly lost. Same thing happened in the dot-com bubble, right? People thought oh my God, the internet's going to change everything. Great, I should buy every single stock and lever up and, take a mortgage on my house and go buy tech stocks. And they got killed. Everybody who did that ultimately got punished. But in the long run, if you held those companies, every single one of them was a huge returner, even relative to the high of the dot-com bubble. And so the same thing, I think, is true in crypto, is that, look, if you bought Bitcoin at 120 and you're down to 70, you're like, man, fuck this crypto stuff, total scam. This space is, full of lies. Nothing ever really happens in the space. And yet, if you hold that for 10 years, I'm going to guess that you are going to make a lot of money.
That's true for Bitcoin. What about other altcoins? Solana, Ethereum. Now people are even worried about Ethereum.
Yeah, they should be. For everything besides Bitcoin, there's still a lot of game to be played. I think the best smart contract platform is going to be worth a lot more in 10 years. But is it going to be Ethereum? Is it going to be Solana? Is it going to be something else? The reality is that you don't get any guarantees in the world of technology competition, right? Just because you were there first, you might be the IBM. You might be the first one to go when the next technology trend arrives. So IBM at one point was the most valuable company in the world. Now you can barely see them on the top 50. So nobody is given the right, independent of execution, to stay on top. You have to earn it.
The internet era where you hold the good company, the right company, you're going to make it, right? But in crypto, we have equity and token. So people have this hard time to understand the difference between these two and where does value go. For example, Intercontinental Exchange, invested in OKX at 25 billion valuation, but OKX has OKB. Now, where does the value go?
If you look at ICE, so my understanding was that deal was an investment of $200 million.
Yes.
$200 million means that they bought less than 1% of OKX. And ICE is worth over $100 billion. So ICE investing $200 million out of a $100 billion company, that means they invested 20 basis points of their company into OKX. If that was a good investment, I don't even know if it would show up in the ICE stock price, right? Let's say they 5x their investment. That means that they have $800 million of profits. That means the valuation of ICE should go up 0.8%. Could you even tell on a given day if ICE went up because of its investment in OKX? I don't know.
OKB went up a lot.
OKB went up a lot because OKB is worth a lot less than ICE is worth. Like OKB is like a, $1 billion token or something like that, whereas ICE is worth 100 billion plus. So all that is to say, you have to understand the relative scale of what you're buying if you're buying an equity versus you're buying a token. Now, that said, it's important to also remember the sense of scale, okay? The entire crypto market, like just crypto assets, is over, I think it's on the order of like 2.5 trillion today, okay? Ethereum alone is over $200 billion. If you look at the crypto companies that are public, biggest is Coinbase. Coinbase is about 50 billion. Then you get to Circle. Circle's like, 19, 20. And then it drops off pretty readily from there, right? So you add all those together, maybe you get to something like 100 billion in total value, which means that all of the stock market for crypto is worth less than half of Ethereum, right? The crypto native market is way bigger than the crypto stock market, at least today. Now, it's possible that changes at some point in the future, but it has not changed anytime in recent memory, and I don't think it's that likely to change. And that's just Ethereum, to say nothing of Solana and all the other assets that are out there that follow Ethereum. So the crypto market is mostly the crypto asset market. The stock market is great, but it's a sideshow right now to where the real trading volume, liquidity, and the overall mass of value in the crypto industry is. It's still mostly in the token market. So it's important not to forget that.
You don't think that's going to change?
Investing in stocks is bad. No, I don't think that's going to change. I think that the majority of value will continue to be in crypto assets, not in crypto stocks.
When I'm explaining what tokens are to people that are not familiar with crypto, I use the IPO, ICO analogy, right? It's just you're holding a piece of the company. But people are more used to the concept of equity. They're like, well, aren't you just talking about equity now? But now there's equity and token, and you're trying to explain token by telling me it's equity. Like, it's a little confusing sometimes.
So I think there are tokens that represent different things. So, like, for example, you can buy a stock that's a holding company that just includes a bunch of gold in it. Now, I don't know why you do that. That's not very tax efficient, but let's say you did that. That stock is a stock, but it's not really an equity. Technically, it's an equity, but it really represents gold. It represents a commodity, right? So the fact that it's a stock change anything? Well, not really. A stock is just like a wrapper for an underlying asset. What's the underlying asset? So another thing that you can see is REITs, right? So a REIT is a real estate trust, a real estate investment trust. So if you were to buy a REIT, now again, let's assume that it's in the stock market. Oftentimes REITs are listed differently, but let's say it's in the stock market, okay? So you buy a REIT. A REIT is basically just a bunch of apartment complexes in different parts of the country. You bought a stock, but really the stock represents real estate. So you kind of bought real estate, but like the underlying exposure is to real estate, but the thing you bought is a stock. So you might think like, oh, well, I have exposure to the stock market. I have exposure to, what the cash flows are. Well, I mean, you kind of do, but the main thing you have exposure to is real estate, right? It's the underlying asset. So in the same way, a token is just a handle on an asset, the same way that a stock is a handle on an asset. But the question is, what is the handle connected to? Is it connected to a commodity like gold? Is it connected to a real asset like real estate? Or is it connected to a company that has cash flows and dividends and all this other stuff? Then, okay, well, that's what we normally think of as an equity, is a share in a business, right? But not every equity represents a share in a business. So what does a token represent? The answer is, show me the network and I'll tell you. For Bitcoin, what does Bitcoin represent, right? Does it give you cash flows in anything? No, there's no cash flows in Bitcoin. It just gives you a commodity. Bitcoin's a commodity. So, okay, now I have Ether. What does Ether represent? Well, Ether is a little more complicated, right? It's got cash flows because Ether gets burned. There's revenues for the chain. It's also a commodity because you use Ether to pay for gas. So it's kind of the oil of Ethereum. It's also currency, right? Things get priced in Ether on top of Ethereum. Not a lot of things anymore, but there's still some things that get priced in Ether. So it's kind of it's hard to describe exactly what it is. Now, if you look at something like Hyperliquid, this really looks more like a share in a business, right? The business is a decentralized exchange, and you get a piece of the profits if you own some of Hype token, right? Same thing with Uniswap, right? If you own Uniswap, you get a piece of the fees if you own some Uni token. So different tokens represent different things. If, on the other hand, you invest into, Digix or USDG, right? Okay, well, now you're investing into gold. It's a token, but the token, what is the token a handle on? It's a handle on a real asset or a commodity. And so therefore, you're really investing into gold, even though it's a token. So token is just the wrapper. It doesn't necessarily imply what the underlying valuable asset is or does.
So beautifully said. Can I think of it this way? A company should not IPO and also have a token. Because that's very confusing.
Maybe not. One can imagine, for example, let's say that Polymarket IPOs. Okay. What are they IPOing? They also have a token. What are they IPOing? Well, you can imagine that they IPO their US regulated business, which is off-chain, but then they have a token that represents their on-chain offshore business, which is not available to Americans. Right? So Americans can trade on the US regulated exchange, which has CFTC license, it's surveilled, you have to KYC, you have to do all this stuff. And the way you get exposure to that is you buy Polymarket on the stock market. But if you want exposure to the off-chain Polymarket, you go buy the token. And that thing lives on the blockchain, it's decentralized, it's permissionless. So I can imagine a world where there's actually a very coherent way to divide into an off-chain business, quote unquote, and an on-chain business, quote unquote. But most things I would not categorize that way. I think most things, if you have both equity and a token, you're probably double dipping or you're doing something very confusing.
And also, NASDAQ announced a partnership with Kraken to enable 24/7 tokenized stock trading. So then you remove the barrier of entry. Now everybody can, hopefully
not
invest
everybody.
in US stock. Right. Not everybody yet, but that's the dream, right? People
Well, that's not their dream.
everywhere.
That might be our dream, but that's not the NASDAQ's dream. The NASDAQ is not trying to get Chinese people to be able to trade US stocks. So we might think that that's a valuable thing, but I don't think the NASDAQ agrees with this.
Right. But okay, let's not talk about like the legislation and the law, but it's removing the barrier of entry. And then, they're promising that it's going to happen 2027. And now, all the token holders have the same rights as traditional investors. So in that case.
Hold on. So
okay.
If you're talking about tokenized stocks, the expectation for tokenized stocks is that you are KYCing on the exchange. They know who you are. You can buy fractional shares, which right now you go to the stock market, you can't buy fractional shares on a lot of platforms. Like you can on Robinhood, but you can't on a lot of other platforms. So you can buy fractional shares. You can trade them 24/7. The end. That's it. It's not, okay, anybody can trade, you don't have to KYC, you can take your things off chain and go do whatever crazy thing you want with it. It's like, no. All it is 24/7 and fractionalized. That's what they give you.
For now.
So if you want, there's not even a proposal to do anything more than that because it's not compatible with securities laws. So if you want like hyperliquid level insanity, that's not going to happen because, the NYSE or the NASDAQ partners up with somebody to do tokenization. Tokenization does not give you that property. So what is more subversive is the thing that we see on crypto every day, which is this global, permissionless, unstoppable financial market. It's the internet capital markets, as we often call them. That thing is not going to happen because the NASDAQ wants it to. It's going to happen because the world wants it to.
Does it start with crypto exchanges becoming, universal everything exchange?
That is one part of the path, but I think DeFi also has a large role to play. And increasingly what you see is that a lot of the exchanges are leaning more and more on DeFi and non-custodial applications in order to allow their customers to be able to do whatever they want to do. So it's like, okay, well, if you can't do it on our platform, stay on our wallet and do it from our ecosystem.
Did you grow up in a very wealthy family?
No. I grew up in a pretty middle-class family. I mean, when my parents, when I was born, we lived in a very small apartment. My parents had just emigrated from Pakistan to the U.S. I was born in Texas. So, we lived very, like my parents were college students trying to make ends meet as immigrants. But I mostly grew up middle class.
If you could go back, what would you say to, yourself when you just started? What are some advice you would give yourself?
So one, I would say, choose the path that makes you stronger. I would tell myself that the most important skill in life is saying no to things.
Oh,
and
yes.
assuming that the longer that you say no and the longer that you hold on to your opportunities, something amazing will come along. And if you say yes too early, you risk losing the really big opportunity that's waiting for you. The last thing I would say is spend less time trying to please other people and more time building relationships and taking care of them.
I love that. I think everyone's going to find it very insightful, and I hope you come back and share more because this is amazing.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate you having me on, Bonnie.